Federal agents arrest the sitting mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and charge him with a single count of trespassing. Ras Baraka runs the largest city in the state, roughly 305,000 residents. Agents handcuff him on May 9, 2025, on public ground outside Delaney Hall, a privately run ICE detention center, while 3 sitting members of the United States House of Representatives stand a few feet away and watch. 10 days later, the charge is dismissed. A federal magistrate judge calls the arrest hasty, in open court, on the record, about the office of the United States Attorney. Here's where this goes. The same U.S. Attorney's Office that let the mayor walk turned around weeks later and indicted a member of Congress on 3 federal felony counts for that same afternoon. This covers what Delaney Hall actually is, who profits from it, and why Newark had already been fighting it in court before a single detainee arrived. A routine oversight visit, the kind Congress has the statutory right to make, ended with the mayor of a major American city in a holding cell. The paper trail here is unusually clean. Almost everything below is on the record. Start with the building. Delaney Hall sits on Doremus Avenue in the ironbound section of Newark, an industrial stretch of warehouses, tank farms, and truck routes near Port Newark. The facility holds roughly 1,000 beds. The government doesn't own it. The GEO Group runs it, one of the 2 largest private prison companies in the United States. Under a contract with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the company itself valued at about $1 billion over 15 years. GEO announced that contract in February 2025. At the time, it was one of the largest detention deals ICE had signed in years. Here's the part that doesn't fit. The building had been a detention facility before. GEO had operated a halfway house and detention operation on that same Doremus Avenue site years earlier. When the new ICE contract was announced, the city of Newark said the facility lacked the proper permits and certificates of occupancy to reopen. So, before anyone put Ras Baraka in handcuffs outside Delaney Hall, his city was already fighting Delaney Hall in municipal inspections and in court. Look at what that fight actually looked like on the ground. Newark sent city fire inspectors to the Doremus Avenue site and, according to the city, they were turned away at the door, denied access to a building sitting inside its own municipal limits. A mayor's inspectors blocked from a structure his fire code governs. That refusal isn't a footnote. It's the first time in this story a federal contractor closed a gate on a Newark official, and it happened weeks before any camera was rolling. By the time the mayor stood on that sidewalk in May, the pattern of a locked door had already been set. That's the collision at the center of this story. A mayor and a federal contractor fighting over a building. On May 9th, that fight moved from the courtroom to the sidewalk. The mayor didn't show up alone, and he didn't show up unannounced the way the first press releases implied. 3 members of Congress were there to conduct an oversight visit. Representative Robert Menendez, Jr., who represents New Jersey's 8th District, Representative LaMonica McIver of the 10th, and Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman of the 12th. Members of Congress have documented statutory authority to inspect ICE detention facilities. That authority isn't a courtesy. It's written into federal appropriations law, and members had been invoking it at facilities across the country that spring. Baraka, as mayor, joined them at the gate. What happened next is where the accounts split, and where the video evidence starts to matter. According to the Department of Homeland Security's own statements, agents asked the mayor to leave the secured area. He refused, and agents warned him multiple times before making the arrest. According to Baraka and the members of Congress, the mayor was on the public side of the gate, outside the facility's secured perimeter, when he was taken into custody. Body cam and bystander video from the scene became part of the public record almost immediately. Here's the detail that would matter 10 days later. The trespassing charge, as filed, hinged on exactly where Baraka was standing when agents put him in cuffs. Inside the line or outside it? That one question is the entire case. Hold on to that, because the government's own timeline is about to work against it. For most of the afternoon, the scene at the gate is chaos, captured from a dozen angles. Phones, a live stream, agents in tactical vests. The mayor is a public figure in the middle of a heated crowd. He's also, at that exact moment, a candidate for governor of New Jersey. Baraka was running in the Democratic primary, then weeks away, on June 10, 2025. Every one of those cameras knew who he was. Agents move on Baraka. They handcuff him, walk him away from the gate, and take him into federal custody. Then comes the part the press releases led with. Alina Habba, the interim United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey, announces the arrest publicly, including on social media, framing it as a trespassing enforcement action against a public official who ignored repeated warnings. Habba isn't a background figure here. She had been President Trump's personal attorney before her appointment to the interim U.S. attorney post earlier in 2025. When the top federal prosecutor in the state personally announces the arrest of the mayor of that state's largest city, it stops being a sidewalk dispute. It becomes a federal case with a national audience. That's where the second problem starts. Because a case this public is a case a judge is going to read closely. Think about the position the government put itself in. It arrested a sitting mayor, on camera, on a misdemeanor-grade trespassing count, 10 feet from 3 members of Congress, in the middle of a governor's race. The charge is a petty offense, the optics are enormous, and the entire prosecution rests on a factual question, where the mayor's feet were, that a dozen cameras were pointed at. Baraka is released the same day. He isn't held overnight. He walks out and speaks to the press. The members of Congress speak too, and by nightfall, the arrest of Newark's mayor is a national story. But an arrest isn't a conviction. The charge still exists. Now it has to survive contact with a federal courtroom. It doesn't survive long. On May 19, 2025, 10 days after the arrest, the case comes before United States Magistrate Judge Andre M. Espinoza. And the government does something that tells you how confident it actually was. Prosecutors move to dismiss the trespassing charge against Baraka entirely. They drop it. Judges dismiss charges all the time, usually quietly. Espinoza doesn't do it quietly. From the bench, he addresses the government directly and calls the arrest and the decision to charge a hasty step and a worrisome one. He points out, and this is the line that traveled, that an arrest is a severe action that should follow a measured investigation, not precede it. In plain terms, the judge tells the United States Attorney's Office it charged first and thought second. On the record. In a case the whole country was watching. That's the ending for the mayor's story. Arrested on the 9th, cleared by the 19th, with a federal judge scolding the prosecution on the way out the door. If the story stopped there, it would already be unusual. It doesn't stop there. The government wasn't done with that afternoon. It just changed targets. Remember the 3 members of Congress at the gate. One of them was Representative LaMonica McIver. In the weeks after the mayor's charge collapsed, Habba's office didn't walk away from the events of May 9th. It escalated. Prosecutors brought federal charges against McIver, a sitting member of the House of Representatives, alleging she assaulted, impeded, and interfered with federal officers during the confrontation at Delaney Hall. She was ultimately charged in a multi-count federal indictment. The alleged conduct: physical contact with Homeland Security agents in the scrum at the gate. Contact, the government says, rose to the level of assaulting federal officers under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. Sit with the sequence for a second. Same location, same afternoon, same crowd at the same gate. The mayor's charge gets dismissed with a judicial rebuke. The congresswoman's charge gets upgraded to a federal felony indictment. The government's theory of May 9th didn't shrink after the courtroom loss. It moved down the line to the next person standing at the fence. MacIver maintained her innocence and called the prosecution retaliation for lawful oversight. Her legal team argued that a member of Congress conducting an authorized inspection can't be turned into a federal defendant over the friction of a crowded doorway. The government argued the video showed hands on federal officers and that a congressional badge isn't immunity from Title 18. That fight moved into its own docket, on its own timeline, and it didn't resolve on the same day the mayor's did. Two people at one gate, two completely different roads through the federal system. An indictment carries a weight for a sitting legislator that a dismissed misdemeanor never carried for the mayor. A felony charge against a member of the House isn't just a legal problem. It follows every vote, every committee seat, every hearing she walks into. MacIver kept her seat and kept doing the job while the case moved, which meant she was legislating and defending herself against the federal government at the same time. The government had taken the friction of a single doorway and turned it into a cloud hanging over an entire congressional term. You might be wondering why any of this reached a flashpoint at Delaney Hall specifically. Why this building? Why this month? That loop is worth closing, and it goes back to the money. Geo Group is a publicly traded company. When it announced the roughly $1 billion 15-year ICE contract for Delaney Hall in February 2025, it told investors this signaled the detention expansion coming under the new administration. GEO's own executives described the political environment as the best business opportunity in the company's history. 1,000 beds in Newark wasn't a one-off. It was a template. That's precisely why members of Congress and a mayor showed up at the gate. Delaney Hall had become the visible edge of a national build-out, and oversight of that build-out is a documented congressional function. Here's the fact the early coverage mostly skipped. Newark's objection to Delaney Hall was never only political. It was administrative. The city argued the facility lacked required permits and a proper certificate of occupancy to operate at that scale. Strip away the immigration debate entirely, and you're left with a local government saying a private operator opened a 1,000-bed institution without clearing the paperwork any large building has to clear. That's not a slogan. That's a building inspection dispute, and it's the dispute the mayor was standing on the sidewalk of when the cuffs went on. Follow the thread all the way back. A private prison company signs a $1 billion federal contract. A city says the building isn't cleared to open. Members of Congress invoke their inspection authority. The mayor joins them. Federal agents make an arrest a judge calls hasty. The charge dies in 10 days. And the same office that lost the mayor's case indicts a congresswoman over the same 90 seconds at the same fence. Every link in that chain is a public document. Baraka's own answer to all of it arrives in the form of a lawsuit. After the trespassing charge was dismissed, Ras Baraka went from defendant to plaintiff. He filed a civil suit over the arrest, naming the interim U.S. attorney, Alina Habba, and a Homeland Security investigations official connected to the operation. The claims: false arrest and malicious prosecution. In plain language, Baraka's suit alleges the government seized him without probable cause and pushed a charge it had no real basis to bring, and that it did so against a political figure in the middle of a campaign. The complaint puts a dollars and accountability frame on what the magistrate judge had already gestured at from the bench. The arrest came before the investigation, not after it. That lawsuit did what the arrest couldn't. It flipped the burden. Now the government has to explain in a courtroom why it put the mayor of Newark in handcuffs over the exact spot his feet occupied on a public sidewalk. and it has to explain it to a civil judge under oath with the same videos in evidence. There's a personal detail here that's easy to miss. Ras Baraka isn't a career agitator who wandered into a federal perimeter. On May 9, 2025, he was the mayor of New Jersey's largest city and an active candidate for governor. Weeks later, on June 10th, he lost that primary to Mikey Sherrill. So the arrest that put him on every national broadcast landed in the final month of a statewide campaign he didn't win. Whatever else May 9th was, it was also the single most covered day of his run, a run that ended in defeat regardless. The cameras that recorded his arrest recorded the peak of his exposure and, within a month, the end of the campaign that exposure was supposed to help. It was a bad arrest. Not a bad look, not a controversial one. A bad arrest, in the specific sense a federal magistrate judge used the word hasty, and the government's own prosecutors moved to erase the charge inside of 2 weeks. That's the one judgment this story actually supports, and it comes from the bench, not from the narration. Now for the questions a careful viewer is already asking. First, if the mayor was on public ground, how was he charged with trespassing at all? The trespassing statute turns on the secured perimeter of a federal facility, and the government's position was that Baraka had crossed or refused to leave that secured zone. The dispute was never abstract. It was a line on the ground, and which side of it he was on, and the government dropped the charge rather than prove that line in court. Second, how can the same event produce a dismissal for one person and a felony indictment for another? Because they were charged under different statutes for different alleged conduct.
Baraka's charge was trespassing, a location offense. McIver's charges were assault and interference with federal officers, a conduct offense. The government abandoned the location theory and pursued the conduct theory against a different person. One afternoon, 2 legal roads. Third, why does a private company's contract matter to any of this? Because Delaney Hall exists as a flashpoint at all, only because Geo Group reopened it under that ICE contract at that capacity over the city's permitting objections. No billion-dollar contract, no 1,000-bed reopening, no oversight visit, no gate, no arrest. The building is the reason everyone was standing there. What changed after May 9th? The trespassing charge against Ras Baraka is gone, dismissed, with a judicial rebuke attached to it in the public record. The civil case Baraka filed put the arrest itself on trial and named the officials responsible by title and name.
The federal case against Representative LaMonica McIver proceeded on its own track, testing a genuinely unsettled question: where the line sits between a member of Congress's authority to inspect a federal facility and the federal government's authority to charge that same member for what happens in the doorway. And Delaney Hall kept operating. 1,000 beds on Dormus Avenue, the template Geo promised its investors, still standing at the center of the fight the mayor's arrest was supposed to be about. Here's the detail that captures the whole weight of it.
Ras Baraka was arrested outside Delaney Hall on May 9th,
and the charge was dead by May 19th. 10 days. In that same window, the building he was arrested outside of held its detainees, kept its contract, and lost nothing. The mayor was handcuffed. The facility was not touched. And a federal judge had to say the word hasty out loud in a courtroom to mark, for the record, which of those two things the United States government had actually gotten wrong.